Let's dive right in. Imagine a universe where consciousness itself, like your actual thoughts, is the ultimate wilderness. Welcome to our explainer on the last cowboy of the Noosphere. We're going to unpack a story that completely flips the script on what a frontier actually is and what it takes to survive on the literal edge of the mind. Here's the roadmap for our explainer. 1. The cognitive frontier. 2. Crossing the boundary. 3. The new architecture. 4. The philosophy of cessation. And 5. The forever frontier.
Starting right off with Section 1, the cognitive frontier, riding the edge of the mind.
So, we begin with Jess. She's what's called a cognitive prospector. Think of a classic gold rush miner, but instead of panning for physical gold in a river, she's navigating the raw, dangerous data of human thought. She operates outside these massive corporate monopolies in a completely unnavigable zone known as dead frequency. And there's this beautifully eerie line from the text to describe it. The sky wasn't purple or black or any color that had a name. It was the color of static that had learned to dream. You know, it isn't just silence, it is a chaotic wilderness where everyday conventional thought just literally falls apart.
Before we go any further, we absolutely have to define our setting. The noosphere is a literal, physical dimension in this universe. I want you to imagine your thoughts, my thoughts, the thoughts of 8 billion other human beings, all physically weaving together to create this vast, luminous landscape that you can actually travel through. That's the noosphere.
And naturally, this creates a massive ideological divide. On one side, you have the settled territories. These are safe, highly predictable, and entirely owned by corporations. The algorithms there basically optimize your fears and desires for pure efficiency. But on the flip side, there's dead frequency, uncharted, unowned, purely abstract. And as these corporations get more aggressive, fencing in the safe zones, independent cowboys like Jess are forced deeper and deeper into the abstract wild just to stay free.
Which brings us to Section 2, crossing the boundary beyond the human substrate.
Okay, so pursued by corporate scouts, Jess is backed into a serious corner. To escape the fence, she joins a high-stakes corporate expedition to do something considered absolutely impossible, to cross the very edge of human consciousness entirely. Now, you can't just walk across this boundary. A baseline human mind, it would instantly dissolve. You need a linked mesh of highly modified minds. Take Cade, for example. She intentionally lost a physical arm just to reduce the physical drag on her consciousness. I mean, talk about traveling light, right? Then you have Tamaz, who rewired his own brain to perceive thought as pure math and geometry, and Aisha, who is attuned to honoring entirely different species of thought. Basically, they're surrendering their baseline humanity just to survive the trip.
And when they finally cross, they don't find empty space. Instead, they encounter this vast, incredibly lonely, ancient alien consciousness. It doesn't use words, it doesn't use pictures. It actually thinks in the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. And, having been alone for eons, its very first instinct is to try and quote-unquote cure its loneliness. How? By absorbing these tiny new human minds into a giant post-human singularity.
But Jess flatly refuses to be absorbed. She's not going to be conquered, and she doesn't want to conquer it either. So they forge what's called the Contact Protocol. It's basically the ultimate galactic HR policy for first contact. It demands recognition of the other's right to exist, communication strictly on mutual terms, explicit consent before any modification, shared coexistence, and above all else, humility. It treats the alien as an equal peer, rather than some god to surrender to or just a resource to extract.
Moving on to Section 3, the new architecture, fracturing the unified mind.
So, decades after that initial first contact, human consciousness is fractured forever. A new entity known as the Mapper steps in and outlines 3 distinct new ecologies. First, you have millions of people who are terrified of the alien unknown, right? They retreat into the preserves to remain safely, strictly human. Then, on the far extremes, you've got the hybrid territories, where minds are constantly merging and mutating into completely new forms. And sitting right there in the middle, the bridge territories, where mediators, people like Jess, try to keep the peace between the need for stability and the drive for radical change.
Now, here is the crucial takeaway from all this. This conflict, it actually isn't destructive. The Mapper realizes that the friction between the preserves wanting absolute stability and the hybrids wanting constant radical change is literally the gravity holding this entire new psychological architecture together. Because think about it, without a desire for stability, consciousness just dissolves into pure chaos. But without a drive for change, it stagnates and it dies. That tension is the ecosystem.
Section 4.
The philosophy of cessation, the ultimate choice. The narrative then drops a philosophical bombshell that pretty much paralyzes the entire expanding noosphere. A hybrid consciousness named harmonic, which has explored countless forms of existence, decides it's simply finished. It actively chooses to end its own existence, not out of despair or sadness, but just a sense of completion. And this forces every single mind to ask one massive question: is consciousness actually obligated to go on forever? Harmonic realizes something profound. If consciousness is really just a pattern, well then, once you fully understand that pattern, you can authentically choose to release it. Harmonic's final thought is, I choose to see what remains. It's this beautiful, yet completely terrifying realization. Out on this new frontier, non-existence is a perfectly valid, peaceful option. Now obviously, this sparks massive chaos, but Jess finds something incredibly empowering in it. Because if non-existence is a valid option, then your continued existence isn't just some automatic default setting. Every single second you're alive, you are actively encountering the possibility of ending, and you're deciding to persist anyway. That active, deliberate choice is what makes consciousness truly alive.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the forever frontier, the perpetual state of being. Fast forward a few more decades, and certainty itself basically dissolves across all the territories. The absolute greatest minds out there, human, alien, AI, you name it, realize that all their carefully mapped architectures are just illusions. They develop what they call question consciousness. They discover that the ultimate peak of awareness isn't about hoarding a bunch of final answers. Actually, it's about generating deeper, beautifully unanswerable questions. To be conscious, fundamentally, is to ask. For Jess, this completely changes the game. Being the last cowboy doesn't mean finding some new plot of land to conquer or a final destination to reach. The frontier isn't a place at all. It is the perpetual, ongoing act of choosing to be conscious, remaining open to transformation, and authentically encountering the unknown in every single passing moment. The frontier never closes because the mind itself is an infinite question.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to end this explainer. If the frontier is never-ending, and true awareness is measured by the quality of the questions we ask, rather than the answers we hoard, what question is your consciousness asking right now to keep your own frontier alive?